Canada is facing a quiet cultural crisis. Chinese and Italian restaurants are thriving, while Canadian food itself is vanishing. Is this natural globalization or the death of a national cuisine? Section 1. The rise of Chinese and Italian food in Canada. Chinese and Italian food in Canada isn't just about taste. It's about history, survival, and migration. In the late 19th century, thousands of Chinese laborers were brought to Canada under brutal working conditions to build the Canadian Pacific Railway. Paid less than their European counterparts and discriminated against in nearly every sphere of life, Chinese immigrants turned to the restaurant business as one of the only economic opportunities available. By the 1910s, chop suey houses were a common sight in small Canadian towns, long before poutine was even invented. Italian immigration surged after the Second World War. Between 1946 and 1971, over 400,000 Italians arrived in Canada, bringing their food traditions with them. In Toronto's College Street, Little Italy, and Montreal's Saint Laurent district, trattorias became more than restaurants. They were cultural hubs. Italian immigrants brought pizza ovens, espresso machines, and a philosophy of food as family, making it irresistible to Canadians hungry for warmth and comfort. By the 1970s, pizza had overtaken hamburgers as Canada's most popular fast food, while chow mein and sweet and sour pork were staples of Friday night takeout. According to Statistics Canada, there are now over 14,000 Chinese restaurants and 7,000 Italian restaurants across the country, compared to fewer than 2,000 establishments that brand themselves as Canadian cuisine. The dominance is so ingrained that many Canadians don't even view it as foreign anymore. Pizza is birthday party food. Chinese takeout is post-hockey game food. These cuisines didn't just enter Canada, they became Canada's default. Section 2. Why Canadians choose pasta and noodles over poutine. Food choices reflect economics and psychology. Canadians overwhelmingly choose Italian and Chinese food because of affordability, variety, and branding. A survey by Restaurants Canada found that 72% of Canadians list Italian food among their top 3 dining choices, while 63% list Chinese food. In contrast, fewer than 20% mention Canadian food. That means, statistically, 4 out of 5 Canadians rarely think of their own cuisine first when deciding what to eat. Affordability is decisive. A family-sized pizza from Domino's or Pizza Pizza can feed 4 people for under $20. A box of chow mein or fried rice can stretch into 2 meals for under $15. Compare that to Canadian staples like tourtière, smoked salmon, or artisanal poutine, which often cost $18 to $25 per plate. For working-class families and students, Chinese and Italian food is simply better value. Variety also matters. Chinese menus often feature dozens, if not hundreds of dishes, soups, stir-fries, dumplings, hot pots, seafood specialties. Italian cuisine offers an equal mix of comfort and sophistication, from $10 pasta plates to $50 fine dining experiences. Canadian food, by contrast, is fragmented and less defined. Outside Quebec, most Canadians would struggle to name 5 distinctly Canadian dishes beyond poutine and butter tarts. Branding is the final piece. Italian cuisine is marketed globally as romantic, elegant, and authentic. Chinese food is framed as flavorful, exotic, and communal. Canadian food, meanwhile, is rarely marketed at all. Even Tourism Canada promotes multicultural cuisine over distinctly Canadian dishes, reinforcing the idea that Canada doesn't have a strong culinary identity. Section 3. The economics, jobs, restaurants, and small businesses. The restaurant industry is one of Canada's largest employers, supporting 1.2 million jobs nationwide. But which cuisines dominate determines who thrives and who struggles. Chinese and Italian restaurants combined make up over 40% of the ethnic food market in Canada. That concentration means they attract disproportionate investment, consumer loyalty, and media attention. According to a 2022 industry report, Italian and Chinese restaurants generate over $7 billion annually in revenue, compared to less than $1 billion for Canadian branded establishments. During the COVID-19 pandemic, Canadian restaurants were hit the hardest. A CBC investigation found that 25% of Canadian-themed restaurants shut down permanently, compared to 14% of Italian and 12% of Chinese restaurants. Why? Because Italian and Chinese establishments had stronger community networks, larger delivery infrastructures, and higher baseline demand. Many Canadian restaurants, often dependent on tourism or patriotic marketing, simply couldn't survive prolonged closures. For workers, the impact is mixed. On one hand, thousands of Canadians are employed in Italian trattorias and Chinese noodle houses. On the other, the collapse of Canadian restaurants means chefs, waiters, and family businesses tied to Canadian traditions are vanishing. Critics argue this isn't just about jobs. It's about losing pieces of cultural identity, one shuttered diner at a time. Section 4. Canadian Food Identity. What even counts as Canadian? Ask 10 Canadians to define Canadian food, and you'll hear 10 different answers. Some will say poutine. Others will say maple syrup. Some will point to Quebecois classics like tourtière. Others will insist Canadian food must include Indigenous traditions: bannock, smoked fish, bison, and wild berries. This fragmentation is Canada's biggest weakness. Unlike Italy, where every region has centuries-old dishes tied to geography, or China, where cuisines like Sichuan, Cantonese, and Hunan have global reputations, Canadian cuisine lacks international recognition. Outside Canada, few tourists can name a Canadian dish beyond poutine. Even inside Canada, most people don't eat Canadian food regularly, unless you count Tim Hortons. Attempts to create a unified Canadian cuisine have struggled. In the 1980s, culinary figures tried to brand Canadian Nouvelle Cuisine, a fusion of French, British, and Indigenous influences. But it never gained traction outside elite dining circles. Meanwhile, Chinese and Italian foods were mainstream, affordable, and everywhere. This lack of branding means Canadian food is invisible internationally. Tourists fly to Italy for pasta, to China for dim sum, but almost never to Canada for tourtière. Without recognition, Canadian food struggles to compete in its own market. Section 5. Adaptation versus Domination. Cultural Food Wars. The cultural debate divides Canadians. Some see the dominance of Chinese and Italian food as a testament to multiculturalism, proof that Canada absorbs global influences and thrives on diversity. Others see it as cultural domination, with Canadian restaurants unable to survive in their own country. Fusion cuisine illustrate the tension. On one side, you have creative experiments like butter chicken poutine, sushi pizza, and maple glazed dumplings, celebrated as symbols of Canada's openness. On the other, critics argue these dishes show desperation. Canadian food only survives when fused with stronger global brands. Globally, food nationalism is common. France protects its cheese and wine industries with subsidies and strict labeling laws. Italy defends the authenticity of pizza and pasta. China aggressively promotes its food culture abroad. Canada, in contrast, celebrates diversity but fails to protect its own. That leaves Canadian food vulnerable, dependent on trends with little structural support. Section 6. Voices of chefs, owners, and workers. Canadian chefs describe heartbreaking declines. One Montreal diner owner told CBC that his business lost 60% of its customers in a decade, with many opting for cheaper pasta houses or noodle joints. Others report that even when tourists visit, they ask for pizza or dim sum, not local dishes. Meanwhile, Chinese and Italian restaurateurs thrive. Toronto's Chinese food scene is worth over $4 billion annually, while Italian restaurants generate more than 3 billion. For many owners, accusations of domination feel misplaced. They see themselves as hard-working families feeding Canadians. Workers see both sides. Jobs are plentiful in Italian trattorias and Chinese noodle houses, but Canadian restaurants rarely offer long-term security. Some chefs adapt by training in Chinese and Italian kitchens, but lament that Canadian cuisine has no strong identity to defend. The emotional toll is heavy. For chefs who see food as culture, closing a Canadian diner isn't just losing income, it's losing a piece of national pride. Section 7. The future. Can Canadian cuisine survive globalization? The future depends on whether Canadians themselves choose to support their food culture. Optimists point to revival movements. Indigenous chefs elevating bannock and wild meats. Quebec chefs rebranding poutine for fine dining. Campaigns like Taste Canada pushing local dishes. If these movements grow, Canadian food can carve out a niche alongside pizza and dumplings. But pessimists argue the battle is already lost. When 3 out of 4 Canadians prefer Italian food, when tourists never travel for Canadian cuisine, and when Canadian restaurants keep closing, the trends look irreversible. Unless Canadians themselves decide to eat their own food, Canadian cuisine risks fading into history. So here's the choice. Is Canadian food dying or simply evolving? If Canadians embrace pizza and noodles while ignoring poutine and bannock, then yes, the national cuisine may vanish. But if Canadians rally behind their chefs, support their restaurants, and demand recognition for their food, then Canada can write a new culinary chapter. Comment below. Do you believe Canadian food can survive globalization? Smash like if you believe Canadian chefs deserve more support. And subscribe for more investigations into the hidden cultural battles shaping Canada's future.